So Seaquest is a citizen science marine recording project, and we survey and record all marine megafauna such as whales, dolphins, seals and basking sharks. And to help us, we have a fabulous group of trained volunteers who go out onto their favourite locations and collect data, which a lot of you are obviously volunteers for us, and we're very grateful to have you. So the aim of Seaquest is to engage people with the marine environment, to collect data on marine wildlife, and to better understand and conserve marine wildlife. So to do this, we usually run a jam-packed yearly programme of public watches, events and volunteer training. This year has been slightly different, obviously due to unforeseen circumstances. So we've been hosting these live webinars, but hopefully we'll all be able to get back together on the cliffs very soon. So just to say that there will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions, and if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and they'll come to me and then I'll ask Nick for you. So tonight we are joined by Dr Nick Tregenza. Nick is a trustee of Cornwall Wildlife Trust and a visiting researcher of the University of Exeter. He is the founder of Chelonia Limited, which is a Cornish company working in marine acoustics, and finally a key supporter and advisor of Cornwall Wildlife Trust's Marine Conservation Department. His passion for cetaceans has resulted in him becoming a global expert in the marine mammal field, and we are delighted that he can join us tonight. So without further ado, Nick, please take over.
Okay, so I've got various black boxes sitting on top of my my view here, but anyway, I think I know what it says underneath. So this actually started in 1987 when I realized that my dad, who lived in Mosul, used to see large groups of small cetaceans, I mean piffers they call them in Mosul, between the shore and the island, which I can see just over there. And I realized I had never seen these. So I set up a group of know-nothing volunteers. I mean, literally none of us knew anything. And we tried to find out what was happening. So we couldn't find any historical records that could really give us any idea of a trend. We consulted the Sea Mammal Research Unit and they said, no decline is known. So how could we find evidence of this? What we did was we decided to mine people's memories. And okay, let's get this to, yeah, so we did a retrospective survey of the memories of 1,000 people. So we had a sort of pilot study to find out what to ask them. We had to collect our 1,000 people in an unbiased way. So we kind of went to meetings, gardening clubs, women's institutes, whatever. And we didn't let anybody escape into the kitchen or anywhere to make the teas. We found out from all of them how many years they'd been visiting the coast and what they'd seen. And so our observer group went from 1935 to 85. So it managed to go back 50 years, and it got bigger and bigger as it moved towards the present. In our control events, we had juvenile seals, white pups that were very recognizable. We had sightings of basking sharks, and that showed an extraordinarily lumpy pattern with big swings in numbers. And just in the last 10, 15 years, we've had another big upswing that's going down again. We asked about water spouts or funnel clouds. Quite a lot of people had seen them, and they are definitely doing okay as a species. Actually, they possibly have increased, which climatologists think might be correct. And then we put it all together at the end, and really it was this period 45 to 85 that was really significant and surprising, because there was this big drop in the late 50s, and it kind of just preceded the publication of Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which was an amazingly influential and brilliant book that set out the impact of organochlorine pesticides. This was really interesting because we were expecting that it was going to be gillnet bycatch that had caused this decline, but they didn't really come in to any great degree until the 70s. In 72, DDT was banned, and then in 86, PCBs, which are a kind of industrial organochlorine, were banned. So yeah, this decline affected other top predators, including birds, and now we think maybe even things like great white sharks. And we unfortunately didn't know from our observers what actually they were seeing, what species they were seeing. These are common dolphins, beautiful picture by Paul Semmons there. That's the dolphin that fishermen see most often. It's not the one that we see landlubbers see from the coast. But anyway, since that study, there's been this paper. So if you don't like graphs, I'll talk you through this one. There's 4 sections there. The first section of sort of 6 bars of porpoises, they're all coming out below that red line. The height of these bars is how much pollution they're carrying of this particular sort. So porpoises now are generally below that red line. Bottlenose dolphins are almost invariably above it. And so are striped dolphins and killer whales. So this piece of work was actually stimulated by a retrospective survey, and it was led by Paul Jepson at the Institute of Zoology, with whom we had a lot of discussions about this. So you saw bottlenose dolphins in there doing really badly. This beautiful photo from Colin Speedy of a bottlenose. And they are the ones we see because we have an inshore group. And in our retrospective survey, we discovered an extraordinary piece of dolphin culture, which was that they used to drive fish into Hoo Lake. This is Hoo Lake. It's actually on the Devon side of the Tamar, but we heard about it from people that we interviewed. The dolphins didn't go in there themselves. They hung around outside and waited for the tide to drop, and then it's kind of running almost pure fish out through the channel, and the dolphins can get them. So bottlenose dolphins from our survey appeared to die out in the 70s, and we were recolonized in 1991. But this culture had been lost and has not been seen by the group we now have. We connected up with French strandings groups, volunteer groups like the Wildlife Trust Group, and went to one of their conferences and learned that bottlenose dolphin groups in all these sites in northwest France had disappeared. And generally people weren't actually blaming it on the organochlorines. And one of them, Arcachon at the front there, they only went extinct in the 2000s. And these are orcas photographed from the coast by Stephen Westcott. We have a British population of orcas. It's very small. They haven't had a baby for 18 years. They're so heavily polluted. It is very unlikely that the group can recover. We have to hope, because they're long-lived, that they will be slowly shedding their pollution burden and escape from this trap. So that's really just to make the point that it's not all bycatch, and our initial view of this was wrong. But we also started looking very closely, as you can see, at stranded animals. Initially, we were very impressed by these huge holes. This picture is quite old. I'm sure I lost one of those red wellies when I was about 9. Anyway, and here's a porpoise on Lowland Point on the Lizard, which David Parks, one of our volunteers, looked at. It had a huge hole in its head, but he noticed the marks on the pectoral fin there and that very faint encircling mark. And we realized this was gillnet bycatch. And we're just beginning to sort of get to recognize that when there's a massive stranding, that big spike there in 92, that's mainly common dolphins. 200 of them coming in on the coast. And we used that to negotiate with the fishing industry to set up observation of offshore netters. That's the larger boats, like the ones behind Kath Maguire there. The observers were all volunteers. They did 300 days at sea, of which 100 were actually done by Cork University. And it was an amazing experience for everybody, I think, the fishermen included. We learned an incredible amount. And this is Russell Leeper, who was a mathematician from Oxford and changed careers to become a cetacean researcher as a result of doing this. These are the boats that took us out. And yeah, as I say, it was an incredibly interesting experience for everybody. And this is basically what we found. The white open circles is the amount of fishing effort, and the black circles is the amount of porpoise bycatch. And roughly speaking, the more fishing effort, the more bycatch. So we thought it was easy to count them. You know, you see a dead animal in the boat, that's one porpoise. But actually, there were various surprises. One was that about 30% of the animals that were caught in the nets just dropped out. They never came into the boat. We saw them floating nearby, or we saw them fall out of the net. We expected up to 400 a year. We actually found more than 2,000 a year by basically Cornish and Irish boats. There was a little bit of common dolphin bycatch, 4 animals, and no bottlenose dolphins, but we do wonder whether they get caught, and actually they are recorded now from every country around the coast of Europe, from Britain right down into the Med. And also, who believes what? You know, we found some parts of the fishing industry believed there was no problem, others had a pretty good idea. Politicians were all over the place, etc., etc. We did get quite a lot of cooperation from the fishermen. They did a great job here, for instance, on tagging porpoises. They're then discarded at sea. So these tags were like cattle tags on cable ties around the animal's tail, and those diamonds are where they were discarded. None of those were found on the coastline of any of the countries you can see there. So we learned basically that few of the porpoises caught offshore actually show up as strandings. We also really realized that netters are definitely not the main cause of common dolphin strandings. But with this big gillnet bycatch, we needed to investigate the mechanism. You know, few are seen, but many are caught. So in that study, 46 dead animals were seen, only 9 live animals were seen. And it's only about 1 animal per 1,000 kilometer hours of net use. So you couldn't put a camera on a net, you just never see anything. So monitoring their clicking was clearly the way to go. Here's a quick orientation on gear type. So we were on boats that produced, that set nets, like a wall of net on the seabed, maybe up to 20 miles of net per boat. Drift nets, a curtain hanging down from the surface, and midwater trawls are a bag towed through the water. And then there are encircling nets like purse seines that I haven't put in here. I also ran a observation on tuna drift netting actually for the Sea Mammal Research Unit, and that was very interesting. You can see the locations there, which are, this is Newlyn boats going out fishing off the edge of the continental shelf. And we found there that dolphins are all caught right up at the top of the net or in the middle. They never jumped over the net. And when you looked at the net from above, that's the sort of diagram at the bottom, we realized that if the net was torn, you got groups of animals caught around it. They were confused by this thin veil of net in the water and abandoned their kind of organized swim along the net. So we also set up a program with the Netherlands, France, Ireland, and the UK studying midwater trawls. And this observer is a guy who was studying human population dynamics. He changed to conservation, became the CEO of the Gwent Wildlife Trust, Ian Rappel. And this is a diagram by another observer, Tim Lewis, who was a geophysicist, and he also changed to cetacean science, and he produced this beautiful diagram of how the fish are removed from the net. And it explained things to us we didn't know before. So from midwater trawlers, we realized in gill nets, the porpoises, they're just sort of randomly dotted around. You might very rarely get a mother and baby together. Usually only one of them dies. We thought it was probably a learning effect because talking to midwater trawlermen, they said that in the early days of doing it, they really didn't get any bycatch, but now they were getting quite a bit. There was a sex bias, so male dolphins are much more likely to get caught. And it looks like the dolphins kind of know this is dangerous, and females with calves keep away, but the males swim in, they go right inside the trawl net and prey on the fish that are stressed out of their lives, swimming to get out. This gives it a kind of sex bias. We also found that the fishermen may be genuinely unaware of their bycatch, because if they can't pump the catch out, they take the pump off and it discharges astern, usually in darkness, and they won't even see the dolphin that was in there that actually blocked the pump. And I put dark secrets there. It's this funny thing about who knows what. It's really quite patchy. Yeah, so the story so far is there's bycatch in many fisheries. It also includes encircling fisheries like ring netters, particularly in other countries, as we became aware. There was little public awareness or concern at the time. It was really expensive and difficult to measure this. And it was really difficult for fisheries to adjust what they did. You know, they're quite highly tuned what they're doing. They're skilled and they've homed in on the best way of doing it, and it's not easy to tell them to do something different. We also did a study of different pingers and concluded they were all pretty bad. And so I worked with Fishtek, a brilliant firm in Devon, to develop a pinger that met all the problems we had at the time. And there is the banana pinger. And you'll hear more about that in a later talk. So maybe I will skip the rest of that slide because we're probably a bit late. So trying to monitor their sounds was quite a challenge. This was my outside lavatory, and that's the square white box at the bottom, which has been sawn off, and the door's been blocked up, and the WC's been removed, and it's been filled with water and baffles and ultrasound sources. And this wasn't just any outside lavatory. This was an outside lavatory where there was no acoustic barrier between the floor and the ground underneath. So there was no layer of expanded polystyrene for insulation. It meant I could echo the sound, the unwanted sound, down into the ground, and it would head off roughly in the direction of Australia and not trouble me echoing around in the tank. So out of that came the pod, the porpoise detector. And that developed into the Teapod, which timed their clicks. And for years, I was kind of making this stuff, and we were doing research and learning useful things. But I kept saying to myself, is there a single dolphin out there that would put its thumb up and say, thanks, Nick? And the answer was no, 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 until they used them in New Zealand to determine the range of Hector's dolphin in order to set up a netting exclusion zone. And the pods showed them that the dolphins were going into some of those deep natural harbors and so on at night, but not in the day. and that areas needed to be protected. So I think there might be a Hector's dolphin there that's giving us the thumbs up. You know, I'd love to think it. I mean, look at that. What a gorgeous animal that is. And those dramatic white marks, you know, they probably use them to herd fish. They kind of swim around the fish and then turn on their side, producing this kind of white flash, which scares the fish even tighter into a shoal where they can catch them. So the Seapod it followed the Teapod, and now it's the Fpod. I can't tell you what F stands for, but your guess is correct. And that's our good friend Chris Lowe from Newquay, who's helped enormously with collecting data from this instrument. We also developed a underwater acoustic tank because we needed something better than my outside lavatory. And this is it. And you can see that the builders have never made anything so crazy in all their lives. Anyway, they did a great job, and it was Mousehole's answer to the Large Hadron Collider. And it now looks like this. It's an underground calibration tank. So you can see the top of a pod there, that round white tube on the right, which is being rotated in the sound field. And the sound, instead of being reflected down to Australia, spreads out through the ground. And it's actually very weak sound. It's very, very quiet. So pods became used by a group from the University of Gdansk, who had in Poland, who had a research station in Hell, which is on the end of the very long, narrow spit that you can see up on the right there. And this is Puck Bay. That pronunciation is terrible, but I can never get it right. So, so the view up there was that the porpoise was extinct, although it had previously been so numerous. It was an important species of the commercial hunt. And because it was extinct, they didn't need to do any conservation. So the team from Hell put pods in here, not in the winter, but in the summer. And they produced a lot of data, which we learned to analyze, producing something called the HEL1 classifier. And their success led on to a project called Samba, Static Acoustic Monitoring of Baltic Harbour Porpoises. So it does mean something. How many, if any, Baltic Sea harbour porpoises now exist? So there have been 2 visual surveys. That's like big boats, 6 weeks, 8 researchers, and they'd only seen 2 porpoises, and you can't build an estimate on that. So Samba was set up with EU life funding, put 300 pods across the Baltic for 2 years, processed 12,000 terabytes of data at sea, and the HEL1 algorithm gave us less than 1 false positive second a year. So all those open white circles had not a single porpoise detection, and nearly all the rest were true. So we could see the porpoises were still there. They were even going up to Finland. And they were able to work out what happened through the year. So in the middle of the Baltic there, you can see a long, narrow grey island. That's, oh my God, the name escapes me. I'll think of it in a moment. Anyway, Gotland, yeah. So you watch just south of there, and you can see these tremendous hot spots south of Gotland and around it. I say tremendous hotspot, it's still very few animals and just hadn't been recognized before then. But this data was so clearly good data that it's led to the creation of a large marine conservation zone south of Gotland and 2 more on the coast of Sweden. And greatly renewed interest in Finland, which discovers it has not lost its only cetacean species. Actually, right at the beginning of developing the pod, the Body Shop gave me a grant of £10,000 they were brilliant. They just said, write one page of A4 for whatever it is you're after to all sorts of kind of conservation people. And I said, the vaquita will need this. So that was in 93, I think. The vaquita is an endemic porpoise species in the upper Gulf of California, which is now in imminent danger of extinction because of gill nets used by these boats called pangas. There it is. That's a baby, top left there. You can see the fetal folds. I always think the vaquita looks like a porpoise going to a party. And sadly, the one top right looks like it's coming back from the party. It's currently declining rapidly because another threatened species out there, the totoaba, that huge fish the guy is holding, is being harvested at a phenomenal rate illegally to sell its swim bladder to China as a medicinal product. So that's where it is. You see the red square. The array of dots there is where they put the pods. So they had 49 stations. And at the bottom, there are 3 pelicans, which followed a sort of surface towing rig I had behind our boat. And here's a wonderful piece of local art. So you can see the vaquita on the left. But if your Spanish is good, you'll realize that vaquita means little cow. So there's a little cow done with absolutely joyous coloring. It's got its scuba tanks, it's got its mask and its flippers, and it's trying to become a marine mammal. They adopted our technology after trying all the alternatives, and this was this is a bit heavy going. This basically what it shows you is on the left of that red line a lot of blue and red dots, which was where the alternative method found there to be vaquitas, but actually they're really never there. So those are all false positives, and with our kind of experience of trying to get rid of false positives, we were doing quite a bit better. And this is the graph, the trend of what's been happening to poor old vaquita. And the end of that graph and the next 4 years are all data from pods. So this is at the same time, you know, very exciting for me because we're managing to monitor something down to levels that nobody believed were possible. And it's very depressing because we've had no beneficial impact. Actually, what the data has done, it stimulated a huge rescue attempt. Brad Pitt put a lot of funds into it, but it was too late. The 2 animals they caught either got ill or died, and they abandoned it. So we'll revisit this issue later. So I also looked at whether it could be used in the Amazon, where you have to distinguish these 2 species. The boto, top right there, wonderful classic river dolphin with this long, thin beak, small dorsal fin, big flippers, and the tucushi, which is like a small oceanic dolphin, a bit like a common dolphin. And boto will swim under that floating meadow, but Sotalia won't, so the tucushi. So we could monitor inside and outside and learn to distinguish what they do acoustically. And we may have a further talk on acoustics where I'll revisit some of this. They were adopted to monitor belugas in the Arctic. That's Manolo Castellotti, a former Italian ski champion, struggling with a more difficult task of mooring recalcitrant pods to monitor these characters, belugas. And look at the teeth on that. Oh my God. Yeah, so belugas, they're looking at them in Cook Inlet in Alaska where numbers are going down, and acoustic monitoring is almost the only way of getting really good trends. The Franciscana is like a river dolphin that's actually in the sea. It's got that very long beak, and you can see the red area where it's distributed. Very small dolphin. And pods are being used by Renan Paytach in Babitonga Bay there. You could fit Cornwall in that bay. The Franciscana is doing really badly, suffering terrible levels of bycatch, and I'm thinking the only long-term refuge may actually be in a nature reserve created in something like that place. The Ganges has its own river dolphin, and it's got that very long beak. That's Nachiket Kelkar and his group are studying them. I have huge admiration for these people working in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, and they are using our equipment to monitor these. So the Ganges drains the, get this the right way around, yeah, the western half of the Himalayas, and the Brahmaputra is a huge river. It's the biggest river nobody's heard of, that drains the eastern half of the Himalayas and the Tibetan plateau, and it has the Ganges River dolphin. And there is an NGO there called Aranayak, and that's their mission statement there. They are absolutely awesome. I strongly recommend you to look up Aranayak and see what they do. So they were founded in '89 when we started our work with the Dolphin Group, and what they've achieved is incredible. And that's an animal corridor. So we talk about animal corridors, we just don't know we're born. Yeah, so we've also been involved in some work on the west coast of India, where the species at issue are the Indo-Pacific humpback dolphin, which is like their equivalent of our bottlenose, and the finless porpoise. And the problem again is bycatch, and there's the artisanal fisheries off a beach there. We're just a bit north of Goa here, and there's a pod that has been fished out that was deployed for about 6 months, and it collected amazing data. So the red line is finless porpoises, and the green line is the humpback dolphin, and the blue line at the top is the monsoon. So just putting one instrument in for 6 months tells you that the moment the monsoon arrives, the finless porpoises go somewhere else, and they don't know where they go. So, you know, that gives you an idea of how little we understand about a lot of these species. And now we're in Indonesia. This is in Borneo, and a small, brilliant small NGO called RASI, and they're studying the Irrawaddy river dolphin in the Mahakam River, where it's known as the Pazut. And it's got a very enigmatic smile there. It's definitely got some joke whirling around the back of its head. And they are, among other things, famous for peeing into the air. So they lie on their backs and pee up into the air. So I don't think the smile's for nothing. Yeah, the Mahakam is a kind of wonderful river. And the people studying it are equally wonderful. So the lady in the green T-shirt, I'm wearing exactly the same one, is Danielle Kreb. She's married to a Indonesian. She's converted to Islam, which is remarkable. And she's doing amazing work with schools and conservation zones and everything. But, you know, they're a tiny organization. Here's another tiny organization, that's Jeff Mangle in Peru, persuading a local fisherman to do a trial of the pingers using pods. And it's not at all easy for them. I mean, look how crowded their boat is. To ask them to take anything else on there is kind of amazing. But they've built up a tremendous working relationship with the fishery. And their species of particular concern, there's Burmeister's porpoise. Yeah, so we've also got some involvement with work on the Indus, and we're now sort of providing the instruments for a project to monitor the Yangtze, where there is a distinct species of porpoise. So just to put, there's kind of 80 or 90 cetacean species. The Yangtze had one, the Yangtze river dolphin, which has gone extinct about 20 years ago. The vaquita is going to go extinct probably in the next 5 or 10 years. So after 50 years of evolution, we're chewing them off at about one every 30 years, and all the coastal and river dolphins and porpoises are at risk. So we're now supplying free instruments to, well, the Brahmaputra people and the Black Sea to try and get monitoring in the Black Sea, where we've got Romania, Ukraine, Georgia, Turkey. I'm missing somebody out. This is awful. And Bulgaria, yeah, lined up to try and get a basin-wide picture of what is happening. And we've got the problem there of, can we distinguish the different dolphins? They've only got common dolphins and bottlenoses. So, I'm not doing too bad. This is, I think, nearly the last slide. So what will produce success? So after struggling with this one way or another, I mean, I'm in this as a conservationist, not as a technologist. I think it's got to be indigenous conservation. So these groups that we're involved with, we give them stuff, we support them with technical and statistical and whatever else advice, but we try and stay out of the picture as completely as possible, so it's locally owned. You know, I found working with the fishermen here, the fact that I've got a Cornish name, that I lived in Mousel, or actually Long Rock at the time, made me distinctly more acceptable than might otherwise be the case. And I think it's true everywhere. And there is the very worrying case of the Faroes, where they have the hideous Grind, where they brutally kill large numbers of pilot whales. And it was losing popular support slowly over a lot of years until global conservation bodies and got in and sort of wagged their fingers and said, you shouldn't be doing this, it's horrible, which I totally agree with. But the result was it became a nationalist issue. Support went up to 95% when it was already down to 60, and it's stayed at those high levels ever since. So it's an incredibly difficult path to tread. And, you know, for my money, indigenous groups are absolutely the ones to support here. And when they can do education, that I think actually works faster than everything else. You know, you start off thinking it's too slow and you end up thinking, yeah, but it's the only thing that gets there. And so I'm a massive fan of education, and public awareness is also tremendously important, because politicians won't move unless people are aware and concerned. That may be the last slide. I'm just going to press the button. Yes, it is the end. Okay. So now I guess I try and fix up my camera so you can actually see me, but it's on a piece of bent wire and I don't know where it's looking. So I'll stop sharing the screen.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Nick. That was really, really interesting.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
So the first question we've got is simply, how did you become a cetacean expert?
Well, starting knowing nothing and reading stuff and asking people and doing a watch from Cape Cornwall. So we did, we set up the Dolphin group. We did 7,000 hours in total from Cape Cornwall. And yeah, experts, people like you who just keep on going, looking at the same thing.
Brilliant. And how did you actually then start your career? Did you get involved in research first, and then how did it go from there?
Well, actually, I'd gone to university intending to do marine biology because I was fascinated by the seashore. And when I got there, I thought it was tremendously good fun, but I really ought to do something useful. So I changed to medicine. But actually, nearly all jobs are useful. You know, people would die faster if all shop assistants pulled out than if all doctors pulled out. So anyway, I did change to medicine, and I served 25 years before the mast, as it were, as a GP, and then migrated back by virtue of having got involved in all this bycatch research and produced the pod, and thought it's if I don't develop this, somebody else will, and I'd rather do it myself. So that was it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, got lots of questions coming in now. So can the acoustic pods that you've designed be used in shallow waters or bays? So, you know, if that was less than 15 meters in depth. And would you be able to use them during noisy areas like shipping lanes or with tanker traffic?
Yeah, the answer to both is yes. But somebody was using them in Cambodia, and where they found actually that the Irrawaddy dolphins in the sea there, not in the river, came into places at night that they didn't use in the day. But they wrote and said, where should we put them in the water column? And I said, well, ideally 10 meters down from the surface. And they wrote back and said, well, the water's only 3 meters deep. So they were kind of on the edge of a mangrove forest. And and I thought, oh my God, that isn't going to work, because there are these things we call WUTs, weak unknown trained sources. Some of them live in the mud or in the sediment, and they make sounds that resemble dolphins. Anyway, it worked pretty well. And they put them halfway up the water column. Yeah. And shipping lanes, yeah. It's difficult in harbours, actually, because you have boat sonars going nearly all the time. And the Beluga in the Thames, they tried to monitor that with pods, and we did succeed in hearing it. But the Thames was appalling. It was just boat sonar after boat sonar. They're all operating at the same frequencies as dolphins, so the pod is bound to log them.
Brilliant, thank you. So we have another one, which is roughly how many marine groups are you involved with worldwide?
Quite a lot, actually. I mean, I spend a lot of my time in sort of support and stuff, but I mean, I enjoy it enormously, actually. And there's a lot of really admirable people out there, you know. And I can see Colin Speedy there, Colin and Lou looking like something on what, Gogglebox. And yeah, I know he would say the same. You know, he's got experience of working with different groups in different places.
I think Colin and Lou would be great on Gogglebox. You should think about doing that, guys.
Yeah, they'd have some pretty sharp opinions.
Okay, another question. Is there a type of net specifically that causes more concern for bycatch than others? And if so, do you think there will ever become like a blanket ban on them?
Yeah, I mean, there was a blanket ban on high seas drift nets. I mean, they were immensely long, but unfortunately, it's gill nets that are probably top of the list. But actually, every kind of fishery's got some problem or other. And actually, I've got here, I don't know whether you can see this, this is a tray full of sea fans that were extracted from one ball of gill net from a beach in Devon, and the ball of gill net was about that big, and there were 105 different sea fans in there, which were painstakingly extracted by Georgia Slater, aged 10 at the time, and she cut them all out and counted the number of individuals. So, you know, that's a different kind of bycatch. I mean, the word bycatch just means incidental catch, things you didn't want to catch. But, you know, there's different problems with different fisheries. And the really tough thing comes where it's a fishery by poor people in, you know, and they're really totally dependent on it. And, you know, what you get is a fish stock that's declining. So the fishermen are desperate, but it's also concentrating them and the cetaceans in exactly the same place. And that's, you know, if we could get rational fisheries management, so the stocks are better, that would alleviate that problem to some extent.
Great, and then kind of leading on from that, someone's asked that regarding eating fish in the UK, would you agree with the statement that you simply cannot eat fish unless they're pole or line caught with any certainty that cetaceans have not died in the process?
Well, the word certainty is kind of tough there, isn't it? Because that means zero bycatch. And yeah, if you want it to be zero, you'd probably have to say that. But actually, line fisheries do have problems in other places. You know, they even end up shooting at sperm whales in the Arctic because they're taking fish off lines. Fish stealing from lines is quite a problem. So I wouldn't want to be too simplistic about this. We do have to arrive at compromises, and you know, I'm sort of going off the question a bit, but the Chinese, they lost the baiji from the Yangtze. They're now really trying with the finless porpoise, and they've recognized that the Yangtze is so difficult. It's got big shipping, high levels of pollution, and nets. They are putting finless porpoises in a couple of lakes, large lakes, you know, 20 kilometers long, as a sort of safe refuge. And I think that is a very good idea, actually, because I think that may be the thing that saves that species. And our acoustic stuff has shown extraordinarily interesting things about the way they use their echolocation. But I think we may have another talk on acoustics, you know, where I can talk about some of that stuff.
Okay, I think we've got time for just one more question. So with regards to measuring acoustics and things like pingers, for example, has that been effective in the reduction of bycatch in the UK since it was introduced?
Yeah, so there is an EU regulation that requires the larger boats to use pingers. We don't actually, most of them are using a rather unsuitable pinger. We don't know how well they're being used, but we do know from a couple of studies from the States that pingers are producing benefit, substantial benefit long term in a porpoise gillnet fishery and in a drift net fishery for swordfish, where they're actually reducing a dolphin bycatch, and that, which generally is much harder to do. And they've reduced the bycatch in that fishery of beaked whales, which are kind of 20-foot long, incredibly deep diving whale. They've reduced that to zero. So yeah, pingers in the right circumstances are very valuable.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Nick. It's been absolutely wonderful. The talk was great. And thank you for answering all of those questions as well. I didn't manage to get through all of them, but I'm sure potentially, Nick, if you don't mind me emailing you with some of those if people want them answered.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I do, answer emails. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just hugely relieved that I managed to have one computer crash and get back online on another
You
one.
did amazingly well.
I
That
didn't
was
think that was
brilliant.
going to work.
Can I
Okay.
point our next seminar, following on from Nick's success, is that our next seminar is set for Thursday, the 13th of August at 7 p.m. again. And it's Rebecca Walker from Natural England, who's a senior marine mammal specialist. And she's going to be focusing on disturbance, marine mammal disturbance, and her research that she's been doing over the last couple of years. So Seaquest will be promoting that event via a MailChimp a newsletter and Facebook, to keep an eye out for that.
And thank you all for coming as well and listening.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for your attention, as they say. Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye. Lovely to see you.